And we begin with Election Day 2013. That's right, political junkies around the country can rejoice because big-name elections aren't just reserved for even number years. They happen on odd number years, too. So let's take a look at the map. In New Jersey and in Virginia, voters head to the polls to elect a new governor today. And in New York City, in Detroit, and Miami Beach, a new mayor will be elected, although we should probably put an asterisk on the Detroit mayoral race, as we'll explain a little bit later in the show about financial emergency managers. And there are some important ballot questions to be voted on in Colorado and in Washington, two states that made history last year when they legalized marijuana and are trying to make history again this year with a secession vote and a vote to require GMO labeling. Now, we're going to bring you coverage of all these issues throughout the show, but we begin with big races, and our RT team of correspondents positioned up and down the East Coast in some states where polls are now closing. We have Anastasia Churkina in New York and Perry-Ann Boring in Miami, Florida. So let's get to it. Nasty, I want to start with you. Bill de Blasio, he's expected to beat Ray Liotta, the Republican, in a landslide election for the mayoral race there. Not only does he look set to become the first Democratic mayor of New York in over 12 years, but he also seems to be an anti-Bloomberg type of politician. What does this tell us about the changing political landscape in New York and people's moods in general?
Well, Sam, it looks like today really, first of all, there was pretty low turnout in New York, so there isn't too much excitement, it seems, about this election. But the people who did go out to vote, it really seems like they were looking back over the last 12 years and kind of contemplating and weighing in on Bloomberg's legacy, because the two main candidates that are competing against each other, Republican versus Democrat, de Blasio versus Liotta, one of them, the Republican, of course, he said he basically would follow in Bloomberg's steps. Liotta said that he would continue with his policies, that he would basically stick with more of the same. And it's the new kind of the candidate that we are expecting to win tonight, de Blasio, who said, look, it's time for change, and New Yorkers really seem to be catching on to this message if this message ends up being something that he sticks with his promises. But he is very far ahead in the polls, and the things that he promised are quite simple and that have been huge issues in New York over the last several years. The huge wealth inequality between the rich and poor in the city, of course, something that Bloomberg was certainly not able to tackle or did not concentrate enough of, being one of the richest people in the United States. De Blasio did promise to put an end to the controversial stop and frisk program, to find more affordable housing in New York City. Certainly something, a huge issue for many people continuing to struggle on this market, and really just benefits for low-wage workers, something that's really important for New Yorkers these days, because many people are still continuing to largely see the aftermath of the financial crisis of 2008. So this is a candidate that's really stealing the headlines because of promising these changes. And many supporters are saying, we do want a new New York.
Well, I mean, what are the chances that some of these policies he ran on actually are implemented? He's running on things like raising taxes on wealthy people, doing something about income inequality, yet this is a city where mayors have traditionally had a very super tight relationship with Wall Street. So is de Blasio, heading for a rude awakening when he comes into power here?
Right. Well, it's possibly either him or the people who elected him, because, certainly, Sam, you would agree that in the U.S. we've seen quite recently examples of even bigger politicians promising huge change and then not really following up with those promises. So this is something that Americans and New Yorkers seem to be braced for. And the people we spoke to said, yeah, we're hoping he's going to stick with these promises, but we can just only keep our fingers crossed at this point. And yes, because of this super tight relationship between Wall Street and Bloomberg, the financiers, at least here on Wall Street, have gotten used to this certain, cozy relationship. And with this guy coming in and saying, I'm going to tax the rich, certainly there's going to be quite a battle, it seems, between him and Wall Street when if he begins to really implement the promises that he's made.
Right. Well, after all these years, a mayor just not named Bloomberg is quite a big big change. I want to go to Megan Lopez now in Virginia. What's going on there? Polls just closed over an hour ago. We're talking, of course, about the governor's race there. We had the Democrat Terry McAuliffe leading the Republican Ken Cuccinelli, plus there's a Libertarian candidate in the mix. What do you know about voter turnout and election results at this point, Megan?
Hi, Sam. Yes, as you mentioned, the polls closed just about an hour ago. And right now, they're still just too early to call. There were initial reports saying that Terry McAuliffe was in the lead. However, just recently, we've got some reports from the Washington Post and Huffington Post that say that right now, we've got a 15% counting rate, and Cuccinelli is in the lead 51%, with McAuliffe trailing behind 40.2%. Now, one of the interesting things to note, and the person that we've been following in particular, is Robert Sarvis. He's the Libertarian candidate. Throughout the entire election, he was polling at 10%, and right now he's actually holding pretty steady in the polling results anyway, at about 8%. Now, in this election right behind me at the Rosslyn Fire Center, we had early results come in. 977 people voted for McAuliffe, 271 people voted for Cuccinelli, and 70 people actually came out, so it reached that 5% mark for Sarvis here.
Why is the 10% mark so important for Sarvis?
Well, 10%, obviously, you can't win a governor's election with 10%. But what you can do is guarantee the future of the Libertarian Party. And that is because a specific law that's in the Virginia Election Code, which says that in the election before, if a party garnered 10% of the votes, they're automatically guaranteed a place on the ballot in the future. So that's really important for a few different reasons. Most of the time when you have these third-party candidates come in, they have to spend the majority of their funding and their resources and their time in those early days just trying to get on the ballot and fill out enough petitions to get on the ballot for the primaries. So they lose a lot of time that the other Republican and Democratic candidates have. The other thing is they get more face time because they will be allowed in the debates. So they can have that extra time to speak to the voters, to get their face out there without having to raise the vast amounts of money that the Republicans and Democrats easily pull in.
Right, and the latest results I saw Sarvis right at that 11% number, just above it, but there's still a lot of votes to be coming in, and I'm sure his team will be watching that number very closely. Let's go down to Perry Boring now in Miami Beach, where there's been a mayoral election that's nonpartisan, which has made for a fairly colorful field of candidates. This is probably one of the more entertaining races around the country. Perry, can you give us an idea of who some of these characters are in this race, and then if there are any results trickling in yet?
Yeah, we are starting to see a few numbers. The three main candidates are one, Philip Levine. He is the CEO of Royal Partners, and that is a multi-billion-dollar media conglomerate. And Philip Levine himself is a multi-millionaire. He has spent about $1.5 million on his election for a seat that only pays $10,000. And he has hired the best people money can absolutely buy to run his campaign. And he even got former U.S. President Bill Clinton to come down to Miami Beach and endorse him. And he looks like he's doing pretty well. The second candidate that I've been following around is Steve Burke. He's 32 years old, a former pro tennis player. He suffered a very serious back injury, lost his entire athletic career to it, and turned to medicinal marijuana as a natural means of treatment, and has been a big advocate for legalizing marijuana. And he's running on a platform of decriminalizing marijuana in Miami Beach, but has made him a very alternative candidate. He's also only raised a small fraction of the amount of money that Levine has spent, and he doesn't have the same resources and manpower to get people out there to vote for him as his opponents. Now, the third person I need to mention is Michael Gongora. He is Miami Beach's first openly gay elected city commissioner. He's now running for mayor, and we've gotten some numbers in. Early voting started 2 weeks ago, and with the absentee ballots plus the early voting numbers, Levine is leading at about 52%. Gongora has about 37%, and Burke only has 8%. But again, Levine had the type of resources to bring buses in, to get a lot of the elderly people, to get a lot of people mobilized and moved on the ground and get them to the polls, and we think that's why these numbers are reflecting such.
Perry Ann, thanks for the update. That was RT correspondents Megan Lopez in Virginia, Anastasia Churkina in New York, and Perry Ann Boring in Miami, Florida. Thank you all.